Hey, I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and welcome to day 3 of the 7-day song on Progressive House, sponsored by Filter.com, the tag-based events search website. Yesterday in day 2, we made a crisp, dirty bass sound that also functions as a sweet electro lead synth, along with a simple sub-bass. And today in day 3, we'll be venturing towards the mids and highs with some pads to really fill out those breakouts. First, let's take a look at that Prog House lead pad. Combinator. Let's name it lead pad. Since this is a big lead synthy pad sound that really fills out a load of the frequency spectrum, put in a mixer, line mixer 6-2, followed by Thor numero uno. Yep, another multi-Thor synth. This genre really takes things to a whole new level of Thor whoring. I'll just add in some notes now. Okay, there's the notes and I've soloed it out. Let's go back to Thor, initialize, open, and let's add another analog oscillator and a multi-oscillator as well. Now the analogs on Saw are just fine, but if we run them both through, take a listen to what happens as I slightly detune them from each other. You could hear that the sound thickened up. This is essentially what a multi-oscillator does, but with more synths. One thing you'll notice is that the more synths that are detuned, the thicker the sound, but you can also lose that punch in a mess of prettiness. So I've gone for the best of both worlds. The lead focal point with the note I want to take the 4 will be these 2 analog oscillators, and underneath, so bring it down an octave, we're going to have this multi-oscillator, just filling things out a bit, and then run it through as well. I think now is a good point to bring up the release and sustain in the amp envelope. There, we've got more of a kind of a sharp pad lead sound. We're going to bring the filter envelope up because the majority of this synth tone, the main part, comes from this envelope affecting this filter. And now watch what happens in the filter envelope after I've brought this envelope value up here as I bring the decay down. Just gives it that nice sharp pluck sound. The decay is the time before the filter closes down to the value defined by this sustain. So shorter decay values mean sharper attacks of high frequencies before the low-pass filter filters them out. And the last thing in here, we're going to turn on this chorus and just bring down the dry wet a bit. Just add a little bit more thickness. And that's pretty much this Thor done. Later on, we're going to modulate this release here to get that iconic prog housey and trancey, messy, pretty, noisy build-up E. Next Thor, we're going to duplicate this Thor. Right-click, duplicate devices and tracks, and then hit Tab and link it up into the mixer. Let's hide this programmer so we don't get too confused. And in this new oscillator, if I solo this out so we can hear it as we work on it, we're going to change the oscillators, the first one to a noise oscillator and the second one to a multi. So we've got 2 multi-oscillators and a noise oscillator. I always used to wonder about the usefulness of a noise oscillator, but this synth shows a brilliant use for it. Make sure it's on white noise, and with it run through, if I just have just that one synth, and with both synths, it just adds this brightness to the top end of the sound that you might initially think is a bit loud or overbearing, but take a listen to any track with this kind of synth in the charts and you'll start to hear white noise at the top of all of these synths. Apologies if I just ruined one of your favourite genres of music forever. Then, in the other oscillators, we're going to have them both on Saw, as they already are, convenient, and bring one up an octave, so maybe take this one up, and make sure they're run through as well. And if we take another listen, now you can hear this just really adds that top end, which is what this Thor instance is all about. The mixer up here will help us mix together a punchy tone with a nice sheen to it. In fact, let's rename this instance of Thor Bangin, and this instance 7 gram rocks. Before we start piling on the post-mixer effects, we're going to add a compressor to the first instance of Thor, the Bangin instance, just to give it some more punch. Right-click, create M-class compressor. Bring that threshold down a tiny amount. And full ratio so it really hits hard. with the release at 0, so the volume after the initial punch is brought up as well. Now let's take a listen to that. If we bring down the volume on the high-end one a bit in the mixer, maybe bring this up a little bit in the output gain here. Alright, now we can start piling on the effects. Let's go all out and add, right click, create, hold shift when you make these, an EQ. Holding shift stops them from automatically linking to the aux return here. After the EQ, we're going to have a stereo imager. After the stereo imager, maximizer, followed by a compressor, followed by 17 instances of Scream 4. Okay, and then link it up so it looks like this. And let's take a listen to what we've got. After you laugh about the absolute mess the synth has become, delete the Scream 4 instances. And with the EQ, just bring up the high shelf on the lowest frequency and Q just by about 5 decibels. If you have a listen without and with, just hear how much brighter that makes the sound. The stereo imager is next. We're going to slightly widen the top end to about 3/4 of the way around. And bring the crossover down to around 300 Hz-ish. So all the mids and highs are pushed to the edges a bit. If you think about the mix as a 3D space with volume, frequency and stereo panning as the places you can sit in the mix, you're basically telling this synth to make itself at home and take up as much space as it wants, with the rest of the synths in the track shining its shoes and massaging its oscillators. Synths are still very much in the feudal system of government. They're quite backwards in that respect. Maximizer-wise, we're going to put full input and soft clip on, get rid of the limiter as well, so that soft clip really works, just for a bit more punch and volume. So without and with. Maybe a little bit less input gain. And next up, we're going to link the compressor to the sidechain like we always do at this time. So hit tab and drag from the spider splitter that we made to the combi input, and from the two devices to sidechain in. Set it up so if we solo out the drums as well so we can hear the sidechain. Going to bring down that threshold a bit and up that ratio. Maybe not so much. There we go, just a bit more subtle on this one. And there we have our lead pad. Now we're going to automate the release modulation, as we said. So in the programmer, show programmer, we're going to route rotary 1 to the amp envelope release of both Thor instances. So find bangin for rotary 1, and then amp release 0 to 127 is fine. And for 7 gram rocks, we're just going to do the same thing. Now, take this new release knob, so if we name it release, to a point you're happy with. Somewhere around 30. And then we're going to automate it by right-clicking and going Edit Automation. And if we have a look, that just gives us a new track lane for rotary 1 down here. Now just draw ourselves in an envelope so we can hear it. See, by default it's at that 30 value which we defined earlier. Quite a useful little tip. So let's go from 30 all the way to the top, just before the end there. Now take a listen. voila, pretty and messy, perfect for a sweet build-up. But we're going to use slightly different notes in the final version so it's not quite as messy. And lastly, just to make it sit in the mix a little bit better, we're going to add some reverb in the mixer above here and dial it in with the aux. So right-click, create RV7000 Advanced Reverb. So you can see that automatically connects to number 2 because number 1 we've put in our Spider audio splitter. And so just dial it in on, we're going to go for film score. I thought that was quite a nice reverb. And just dial it in to taste. If I temporarily get rid of this amp envelope change, just to have a listen. There we go, nice and anthemic. Next up in part 2, we're going to look at another prog house sound that takes its roots from more retro electronica, a nice distorted square wave pad. Don't forget to rate this video, then head on over to learn yourself some of that pad magic.